One of the things that not everybody follows, I don't expect everybody to totally nerd out to this like I do, but if you've been following the world stage for the past, I'd say a full 2 years, really, really heavy over the past year and a half, to see what's going on globally, and then to see America's involvement with all things global. 600, 700, maybe even 800 bases, depending on the information that you find. We have all across, scattered all across the world. Most bases just a few miles from one another, by the way, which is odd. But maybe the bases do different things. But is we're nearing an election in just a few months with Trump and Biden. Of course, there's the RFKs and the other people, but it's going to be Trump or Biden. As we're entering that, someone like you who doesn't always follow geopolitics, when the world seems to be on fire like it is right now, do you find yourself tuning in more? Do you find yourself tuning in more because it's an election, or do you find yourself saying, nope, for me, it's these handful of issues just here domestically. This is what I'm looking for. How do you feel about that?
That's a really good question because when I first started following politics, it was the global and national headlines that I always followed. And I did this from I really started following it 2003, 2004, right around the time that we were getting into Iraq and everybody was
Hmm.
like we don't need to be going into Iraq. And we did anyway, obviously. Then we found out later we shouldn't have gone into Iraq. But all of that said, that I was very much into the global and national scene of politics. In fact, it was around that time where I swapped. I don't even say allegiances because I'm not allegiance. I don't pledge allegiance to any party. But I voted for George W. Bush in 2000, and between 2000 and 2004 is when I started to really transition and think a lot differently about political things and what they mean to me. But to answer your question now in 2024, am I paying attention? No, I'm not. I listen to NPR in the morning so I catch what they say.
Hmm.
And I've just started doing that since summer started for me, which was only like 3 days ago. So I'm way behind. But all of these things that you're saying, I think it's a great question to ask me because I think most voters are like me. I don't think most people pay attention to this stuff until these big things start happening. We're coming closer to an election. Now people start to perk up a little bit, and they're probably entering into this conversation about the same time I am, which is right now. You, though, follow it a lot more, right? So I'm starting to pay attention, but you've been paying attention.
It is. Here's what's crazy, right? So Kim Jong Un, the leader of North Korea, is completely a crazy person, right? There's absolutely nothing about him that would legitimize him as a world leader or them as a superpower, even really a civilized nation. The people there live in abject poverty. The only thing they really manufacture there are weapons,
Right.
and they have lots of them. But because of what's happened with Russia going into Ukraine, and then Biden coming out, a year and a half ago or so, and saying, Russia will be the most sanctioned country on earth. Russia's pivoted to other countries, like North Korea, to find weapons. They've pivoted to countries like China to get goods. They bought weapons from Iran, and what's happening is these bad actors, as we would consider them in the United States, they are aligning together for the first time in 24 years, first time since the year 2000. Vladimir Putin is going to North Korea. This is the first time he has gone there to meet with Kim Jong Un. A few months ago, Kim Jong Un took a train and went to go see him. But they're trading secrets back and forth, right? North Korea is selling weapons, which Russia needs. They need about 5,000 munitions every single month for their war in Ukraine, and they can't manufacture that many. So if they make 4,000, they're buying like 1,000 or so from North Korea every single month. North Korea has, for a long time, wanted nuclear capabilities. Well, Russia has those. Technically, Russia has more nuclear capabilities than any other country on Earth. Now, I don't think you need as many as they have to blow the Earth up like 6 or 7 times, but they've got them. China had 401 nuclear arms. Over the past 2 years, they've increased that number to over 500. China, before the invasion of Ukraine or before the sanctions of Russia, they were about 1%. Chinese companies were about 1% of Russia's economy. They're up to about 15% now of Russia's economy with Chinese owned businesses. China's going into Africa for farmland. Right now, China doesn't make enough food to their food importers, not exporters. They buy a lot of their food from places like us. They're going into Africa now to work with these African countries and nations on growing food there in Africa, setting up Chinese plots there in Africa to grow food and eventually buy from them. You've got all of these things happening. And then the biggest deal for so many Americans is what's going on in Israel. Obviously, we know about Gaza. People have mixed feelings on that, on whether or not it's a genocide or just an ugly part of war.
Genocide.
But that's an American thing. Most of the world says, "Hey, wait a minute. This is completely disproportionate." And they're still in Gaza. They're still attacking Gaza. That's not as much of a fight as it is just a dominance. But Houthi rebels have kind of taken over the Red Sea. We've sent warships there to kind of quell them, even though we're having hard time doing that. Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon, they're the largest military that's non-state backed in the entire world. They've been attacking Israel in the north. Israel tonight came out and said, we will have offensive attacks in Lebanon, going into Lebanon to fight against Hezbollah. That is an increase. So, if you were to look at all of this in totality, you've got a lot of nations who say, okay, Russia shouldn't be in Ukraine, right? You've got the NATO forces, which is 32 countries, give or take. Most of them are aligned, even though Turkey's a little, every now and again, Erdogan in Turkey he'll kind of back out of it. But when it comes to this Israel thing and America's complete support of Netanyahu and what he's doing, even though a lot of Israelis don't support him, he's had his war minister, Gavir, leave last week. We have stayed strong with that.
Let me
Could
stop
we
you.
could we find
Let
our
me,
I guess my question is, could we find ourselves with all of these chips falling into place here, right? All these the hands being dealt, chips being pushed in the middle. Could we find ourselves on an island? Could we isolate over this Israel thing a lot of the NATO nations? Could we isolate people who have been allies for us for years and years and years because of this NATO thing when things are ramping up with Russia and North Korea, Russia buying drones and stuff from Iran.
you just said a lot. All right, I want to take this a few things at a time. Because remember, like most people are like me, like we're just sort of dipping our toe into this. I'm guessing.
Hmm.
I want to start with the North Korea Russian meeting. So this is and I heard this today on NPR. This is the first time in 24 years that Putin is meeting or going to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un. What are they saying these meetings are? Are they coming out and just saying straight up like, "Hey, we're just we're plotting here. Just everybody turn away. We're just having a conversation."
Well, Russia is going there. Putin's going there because he needs munitions, right? He needs to fill that gap up between what they use every single month and then what they need, things that they can't manufacture at the same clip rate there in Russia. So he's going to talk about that. North Korea has long wanted nuclear capabilities. That's kind of, one of the things that when Trump went there during his presidency, remember he and Kim Jong-un were saying ugly things about each other. They met, then they kind of became friends and wrote each other letters and like all of this stuff, like Trump or not, he got us into a better spot with North Korea. It did not appear that they were going as hard after nuclear weapons. Well, all bets are off now. The thing you know about Russia is not going to, it doesn't appear, is going to just back out of this thing for whatever reason. And right now they shouldn't. They're winning, right? There was a 2 or 3 month gap where America wasn't supplying military equipment to Ukraine in that little short gap period. So Russia really took control of eastern Ukraine. They're not going anywhere. I don't think they want to face the humiliation of just leaving. Now, could they people like Vivek Ramaswamy said, look, let's broker a deal. Let them have what they've taken over right now. Those are Russian speaking areas of Ukraine. People still identify as Russian there, right? So maybe something like that works out. But as far as for them to leave completely, which is what Zelensky's wanting in Russia, there's no reason for us to think that that's going to happen. So the deal comes down to what's North Korea getting out of this? I'm going to I'm going to say that North Korea is still going after, and I talked to Tom Terry today, Pentagon reporter. Tom fears North Korea is still going after nuclear capabilities, and especially with a focus on nuclear submarines. That is what they want. They have increased the activity. Was it 2 weeks ago? They flew balloons full of cigarette butts and human waste into South Korea and just dropped
What?
them into South Korea. Yeah, they did that just a couple of weeks ago. South Korea fired some warning shots at North Koreans who crossed over into the South Korean border. That happened today. So things are intensifying over there. If North Korea gets nuclear capabilities, it's going to be really bad for countries like Japan, possibly the US, even though there's some distance between us and them. South Korea, countries that are allies of ours right now. So that is the fear with Putin going there. That is the fear. Could they get nuclear capabilities if they
Okay.
don't already
All
have
right.
it?
Well, okay. Let's talk about nuclear capabilities real quick.
Hmm.
Let's say they get it. They just lob one over here at us. All right.
Right.
Well, because here's the thing. It's almost like a game of chicken, right? All of the countries who have nuclear capabilities, nobody's going to be the first one to throw one of those over, because once the first one's thrown, the world, it's done. Like, everybody's done, right? I mean, so there's all this talk about nuclear capabilities, but who's going to be the one to do anything with it first?
I think that's one of the reasons after America dropped the bombs, obviously on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think it's one of the reasons all of these treaties and agreements were made. Like, look, we won't continue to make more nuclear weapons. We won't advance this. We won't sell this technology to other countries. We won't do this, right? All these nuclear agreements were made. But when you have somebody like Kim Jong-un, who said the first round of golf he ever played, he had like 8 holes in one and was like, 20 under par. It says all of
You
these
don't believe that?
crazy things.
You don't believe
Well,
it?
I mean, technically I wasn't there, so it may be hard for me to say.
Man.
But when a true madman gets him with no checks. Now, I understand Vladimir Putin. Obviously, if you run against him, you could find yourself unalived. If you speak out against him in the Russian media, you may find yourself poisoned. All of these things happen, and all these things are very true. But there's still some sort of government there. There are zero checks and balances in North Korea. None. Whatever that guy wants to do, he can do immediately. So if someone like that were to get them,
Let me ask you something real quick, because you said several times you're going to vote for Trump.
yes,
Um, Now we're talking about these Kim Jong Un, Vladimir Putin. They're psychopaths, right?
yes,
They don't have checks and balances. They have autonomous authority in their countries, so they can do
especially
whatever.
Kim Jong Un. I mean, there are
Right.
some pretend checks and balances in Russia.
If Donald Trump were to be the leader of a nation where there were no checks and balances in place, how much different would he be than those people?
I mean, I would say different, number one, but then number two, like, but that scenario is not going to play out. Like, I don't buy into the wholehearted, Project 2025 thing. I've read some of it. I know that it's very alarming.
It is
Uh,
scary.
it's very scary, and I agree with you. My only thing when I take calls like this on my talk radio show, you really think Trump's going to let someone do an entire plan for him and him follow it? I don't think so. Not completely. I really don't.
I don't know, man. I think that's what happened during his first term a lot. Now he went out there and said what he wanted to do, but he didn't run this country on his own.
One and no one does the way it is with the three branches of government. No one
Right. And we know
truly
Biden's
does.
not running it on his own right now. Like, that's
No, of
not, I'm
course
not
not.
saying that either.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know that any of them can completely do right because there's things that Biden wants done and wants funded and can't get it through Congress, right? And that's all of them forever. And then sometimes when like when Trump was there, the first 2 years he had Republican House, Congress, and Senate. I believe that. Bush had that a time or two. Biden may have, or I'm not Biden. Obama may have had that at some point. So even when you do have all the branches of government, it still doesn't. You have the Senate, the House, and the presidency. You still don't get everything that you want done. I don't worry about that as much as in America as I do some of these other places. And this is the most important reason when you do take a look at the global stage. I think this is the most important reason why everybody that is concerned about war and possibly multinational war. I don't want to say World War III. I don't know really what justifies it. To me, you get two or three or four superpowers in it, it feels like a world war, right? Um, but a multinational war, if you were to look at it that way, the one thing that was said about Donald Trump, quotes by these other world leaders, is we stayed in, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase here, we stayed in check a lot because he was so predictably unpredictable. We did not know how he would react to signs of aggression. I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and I think we've had this conversation before on air. Yes, but that very reason is what makes me because what you've set up is a very volatile situation. Like everything that you said the first 10 minutes of this, like the way things are moving globally right now, it feels volatile. Trump is not a calming person. He is literally volatile. Right? I mean that is his personality. He is
Right?
volatile. He is aggressive. He is what's the word I'm looking for? When you act but you don't think. What's impulsive, right? He's
Yeah. Yeah.
impulsive. All of these things that would probably give someone second thought about doing something, but that's also what makes me nervous about living in a country where the leader is volatile, right? Where Trump, he has his own way of diplomacy, I think, of dealing with foreign leaders, but that way makes me nervous. Now, here's the thing on the flip side of that, I don't see any strength from President Biden in the role that he's in right now either. He doesn't project strength to me. And I can imagine that foreign leaders who either project a faux strength or this idea that they like Putin riding shirtless on a horse, or Kim Jong
That
Un
was
saying he
great.
made 8 hole-in-ones, right? So and Trump, look, Trump does the same shit. Trump talks about himself in the same ways that these leaders talk about themselves. Like it's not based in reality. Like they see themselves as something that nobody else sees them as. This is why this election makes me so, I don't know if angry is the right word. Upset is probably not the right word. I'm just frustrated that with everything going on around the world, this is what we're left with in America to pick, right? So we've got to choose one of these two people to go into the next 4 years and handle all of this stuff that's starting to fall into place around the world. And I don't like either one.
And I can hear you with that. And I will say this: my criticisms of Trump would be sharper. Like I'm really torn up that he spent $7.8 billion in 4 years. A lot of that during COVID. That was mishandled. He has never said, "Hey, I mishandled this." He's actually doubled down and said, "Look, if I didn't throw all this money out there, our economy would have tanked." Well, maybe the economy needs to tank a little bit for that. 7.8 trillion did lead to a lot of inflation. Now Biden didn't do anything worth a damn his first 2 years to make that any better, right? He kept doing the money that was sent out, the mailbox money. I never got any, but you know what I'm talking about, right? The stimulus, right? Those things added to the inflation. Totally get that.
Yeah,
I think
for
this is
sure.
such a big deal though for people who follow this, a lot more than I do. This is a very, very big deal. And I think we have a unique look into a president who's been there for 4 years and then another president who was there 4 years before. And we were able to look at the world stage. And like Trump or not, right? It was a more peaceful time. He met with these leaders. There seemed to be a better relationship, even if they're crazy, which we agree people like Kim Jong-un are crazy. Even if they're crazy, his relationship with Putin, they weren't going into Ukraine. We saw about the withdrawal in Afghanistan. All of these things have happened at the same time over this 8 year stretch, 4 years of Trump and now 4 years of Biden. We have fallen behind. We spend more on our military than the next 9 countries combined every year, annually. Last year, the Pentagon lost $1 trillion with a T, $1 trillion in an audit. They could not account for it. $1 trillion. They have not passed an audit since 1981. That was the year that I was born. So never in my lifetime have they passed an audit in the Pentagon. So you would think, well, a lot of that's for our safety. And we do want a strong military. Of course, we want a strong military. And when you're spread out over the globe like we are, you really, really need one. And I agree with that. I asked Tom Scuteri, our Pentagon reporter, I asked him a week or two ago when China unveiled this new drone carrier ship, this unbelievable capabilities. You know, a couple of years ago, they shot that hypersonic missile across the globe. Russia sent up that satellite into space that can take other satellites down. I said, we have these things too, right? We spend more than the other 9 countries combined. We probably have even cooler stuff than this. And Tom Scuteri's at the Pentagon every single day. Said, oh, no, we're woefully behind from a technology standpoint because we do have to spend so much of our annual budget goes towards, I'm going to paraphrase him here, policing the world, having these bases everywhere, being able
Yeah.
to respond within a handful of hours to anything that would break out anywhere across the globe. We're way behind from a technology standpoint. That's also very concerning for me. The reason I say that is I think you're. I hate binary choices. I really do. I think that's a weak way to think. But I think this election it's a binary election. It's one of two, right? Most of these national elections are. I don't think this one's even close. When you take the temperature of the room geopolitically, this one's not even close on who had a better track record and who could maybe navigate through these waters tougher. Like Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. Trump doesn't like him at all. At all. Liked him a lot in the beginning. Benjamin Netanyahu was the first foreign leader to call President Joe Biden and congratulate him on winning the election when Trump was still contesting it. Not that he's not contesting it now, but 3.5 years ago, that really upset Trump. I don't care what slows this thing down in the Middle East. I don't care if it's something. I don't care what it is. But when Trump would say, "Look, you got to calm this down. You can't go into Lebanon, right?" When he, his son-in-law, who's made these $2 billion deals with the Saudis, when he's like, "Look, we've got to figure out, you or Qatar or one of these countries, you got to come in and we got to work this thing out. When we have to have a ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire in place, he could get that done. Same thing with Putin." Right now, do I believe Trump's bought and paid for by Putin? No, I don't. I've never believed any of that stuff. But does he have a better relationship with him than somebody like a Joe Biden? Yes, I think he does. Could he go to Zelensky and say, "Hey, look, you're going to have to give up. I understand you gave up Crimea during the Obama administration. You're going to have to give up Eastern Ukraine. This has to end. This has to calm." You have to have somebody bringing the temperature down when it's this high, because all you're doing is embolden China to go into Taiwan anytime they want to.
But at what point does he not bring that? And that's the thing. Like, he's so unpredictable that he could be bringing the temperature down one minute, and then the next minute all hell's breaking loose. And I think you forget. And look, I'm saying that Joe Biden in 2024, that's not Joe Biden from 2014. All
Mm-hmm.
right, that's not Joe Biden from 2004. But you can't discount, like, he has a ton of experience in
Mm-hmm.
global diplomacy. Right? I mean, he was a vice
Yep.
president for 8 years, right? Before that, he
Right.
was a senator. Like, it's not like he's just Trump. Literally, has only been in. He only has 4 years of experience doing this.
Right.
Right,
But
and
we
so
have a unique time to look in at 4 years of Trump and
it's
4 years of Biden. When you
that
take this and
much.
what's going on, well,
It's not
I
just.
mean,
It's
but look, I mean, Russia. These things are true. Russia wasn't in Ukraine. They weren't. They weren't in Ukraine. China wasn't circling, doing war demonstrations in Taiwan. Russia wasn't dealing with. I think Trump was right when he said the sanctions are failures. They were complete failures. Russia's
right, but
economy grew 3% last year. After they were the most sanctioned country on earth, their economy grew during all of these sanctions because they started having more business relationships with countries like China. China's ownership of their country went up, with Chinese owned companies doing business there and stuff. All of these things increased. They just pivoted. We didn't weaken them. We just made them stronger.
So is that, I mean, and I know, like, I shouldn't even, I'm just asking this to push back a little bit, even though I think I know the answer too. Like, is that causation or is it correlation? Right? Is
Yeah.
it simply because Trump isn't there? Or, if Trump would have won in 2020,
Hmm.
right? Like, now here's the thing. This is the thing. Obviously, there's no way in hell I'm voting for Donald Trump. It doesn't matter anyway. I'm in Tennessee, whatever.
Right.
I'm not going to vote for him. I will say this. This this is the only area where I'm like, I'm not siding with you completely, but I get it. This is the only area of the presidency where I can be like, okay, Trump, he's a maniac. He is. I don't think he's much different than Putin or Kim Jong-un. I don't. His personality, I don't think he's that much different. Or Biden, who I don't know I don't know how to describe him right now, other than just like a shell of flesh walking around. That's it. Like, that's the only thing I've got. So this is the only part where I'm like, I don't know.
It,
I'm torn. Everything else, though, I think another 4 years of Trump and what he might do within the fabric of this country. And I know you cannot completely keep out the geopolitical stuff from this. I understand that that's not, you can't just ignore that. But what he would do with 4 more years scares me to death. As how America would function after that. Whatever he would do in those 4 years, whatever he would put in place. We think Republicans in Tennessee are bad because of the power they have. Imagine that spread across the
it,
country.
but the Republicans are probably going to lose the House. It's been such a shit show for a couple of years now, from the McCarthy ouster to Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to get Mike Johnson ousted. The Republicans are probably going to lose the House. Now they may gain the Senate, depending. And, it's a small lead in both right now. The Democrats have the Senate, and the Republicans have the House. They think that flips. There's still a check and balance in there. I hear you domestically. Now,
I'm
I
talking
personally,
judges and Supreme Court.
two more. You're talking about and I think Biden brought up an interesting point. The two more Supreme Court justices that could be appointed.
And you look what the Supreme Court's even discussing right now. I mean,
But
this
you saw the
this
bump stock ban, which is Trump did in
yes,
2017. That
he
was an
did.
executive order he wrote to outlaw it. On, was it Friday? They overturned it. They said
I
no,
know.
no nachos. Yeah, you can.
Look, it's bump stocks, it's abortion, it's now the IVF stuff,
Has that made
birth
it to
control.
Supreme Court? The IVF thing?
It's being discussed. Look,
Wow.
man, Clarence Thomas, after Roe versus Wade got overturned 2 years ago, he's writing drafts about now. Not, I mean, they haven't done it yet, but they're having discussions about is gay marriage still going to be legal? Right? Do we leave that to the states? So, I mean, there's all of these things that are very concerning that we're seeing at a state level. That if that goes to the federal level, I mean, we're just walking backwards. Well, we're not. We're running backwards. So,
And all of that is true. 18 to 26, 18 or 24, 18 to 24 year olds are draft eligible. That got passed in overnight. Now we're not having a draft. Nothing in this said having a draft, but male and female, which is unique. This is something new. The people that are writing the laws, they know the temperature's hot all around the globe. They know the temperature's hot. I would suggest to you that, God forbid, there was a multinational war that was out there. That would almost trump, if you will, what's going on domestically. Because usually in wartimes, we do band together as a country, or at least we did right after September 11th. I would hope that we would
I
do
don't
that
think that we
again.
will anymore.
I still want to
We got the
believe
way.
that we would.
The Here's why I say we won't, because the way that we all got tricked after September 11th. I
Yeah.
don't think there's ever going to be another situation where, and I know, and I think we're polarized to the point now too that whatever one side says we should do, the other side's automatically going to be against it initially. But also, I think there's just a collective distrust in going to. I don't think we'll ever see again everybody come together like they did to invade Iraq because
And
they got
looking
fucked.
back on it, that was a huge mistake. Like I think it's very
Yeah,
good to use a very skeptical eye before we send young men and women into battle. I think that's part of your job as an American is to really scrutinize that. Every elected official we have really scrutinize that. You know, we haven't been involved in a war that was approved by Congress since was it the Korean War or World War II? It was one of those two. We
really.
haven't been able to technically declare a war in a really long time. I know we've been in a whole lot of them. We haven't been able to technically declare one in a very long time.
Wait, what does that mean? So Iraq wasn't a war. What do we call it?
Well, I mean, you call it a war, but Congress didn't approve it like what we did in Iraq in the 2000s. You have to have a declaration of war, and that has to come from Congress. And we haven't had that. I don't have it in front of me. I don't think it was, it may be, is either the Korean War or World War II. It wasn't Vietnam. So maybe even World War II would have been the last declaration of war that we've had, where everyone that whole uniting, where there are those checks and balances that all work. We haven't had that, and you know we went into Iraq with George W. Bush on really bad information. Now we have friends who were served in Congress at that time, and they've told us a lot of that information that we got. Matter of fact, Bob Ney, who I talk to, you know, every week, he's told me. He said it's my most and this man went to prison after being in Washington. He said it's by far my most regrettable thing that I ever did in Washington was to vote for the Iraq War. But I can't tell you the information that we were shown if I were to show you, were to get, you know, to be able to tell you what we were shown, I think you would have voted for it too. Now, come to find out, it was false. A lot of that bad information, ironically enough, was supplied by Mossad, right, an Israeli spy organization, and Netanyahu. They thought that us going into Iraq would also lead us into Iran, and it's very, very unfortunate. But I think to be extremely skeptical before we send young men and women to possibly lay down their life and war, I think that's really good to be real sure. You know, World War II was going on for a while before we jumped into it.
So let me ask you this, uh, and this may be a good way to start closing this down. So if Kim Jong Un, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, and
Yeah.
Putin are meeting, if all of these things are going in place and they're already setting all of this up, and let's say, which I believe this will happen, Trump gets elected in November.
Hmm.
What does that mean? All of a sudden they're like, "Oh shit! Well, we better stop all this now." That's not. They're not going to do that because they're
I,
already forming these alliances. They're not going to separate and split and take a step back.
Okay, so North Korea could allow inspectors to come in again at nuclear facilities. When it comes to Putin, it's not just dealing with Putin, it's also dealing with Zelensky and saying, hey, look, dealing with NATO, which America still, I know we use percentages like on contributions
Trump
for what
doesn't
we
like
spend
NATO,
on, at all. Well, for the longest time, and
right?
he gets a lot of grief out of this. You're supposed to spend, I think, 3 to 5% of your military budget on NATO, right? Nobody was doing it except for the United States. We were propping up all of these other countries who have single payer healthcare systems. If you always hear about Europe and how happy they are over there. We're not spending damn money on the military. They're in NATO. Of course, you can have socialized medicine. Of course, you can
Right.
have 3 month leave when you have a baby. Of course, you can have all the. You're not spending any money on your military. And Trump, to his credit, called that out. We do have single payer healthcare in the United States. Unfortunately, it's all in Europe and the other nations in Europe. And he was right about that wholeheartedly. They have to spend money on their military. We're, you know, because if anybody invaded them, we would, by agreement, have to be there. I don't think he was wrong about that. He said, you got to pay your fair
Yeah, but
share. We're getting out of this thing.
I get that too, but we can't just pull out. I mean, we're not going
Why?
to pull out
Well,
because if that
probably not, but why can't we if we're
because
doing
if Europe
all
gets
of the work?
destabilized, we're fucked. I mean, like we are, like we
Yeah,
have a huge responsibility, and sometimes I think we're over policing. I think you and I've had this conversation
of
around the
course.
globe, or
Yeah.
we are. We may have destabilized it already without even knowing it, just by putting 800 army bases up all over the world, whatever it is. But at the same time, if we pull out of NATO and we're like, "Hey, y'all fend for yourselves," before we know it, we've got probably 3/4 of the world all pointing them
Dominated by
barrels down
Russia.
at us.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I
we're
get
like,
it.
oh shit, too late. Now
I,
what?
I I get it because we get a lot of stuff from Europe. We do a lot of trade with Europe, and I'm not really suggesting that we pull out. But I think to threaten to leave, say, "Hey, you guys have got to figure this out. You guys have got to pay for it." I think the part of the equation you're missing is he goes to Zelensky and says, "Hey, look, we're no longer in this, right?" Now, he'd have to have the backing of, the Senate and the House, but go to Zelensky and say, "We're not in this. You got to work this out. You have to agree to probably give up some land." A lot of that eastern area, they were Russian speak. I'm not justifying what Vladimir Putin did at all, but Ukraine was never a member of NATO. We've
No.
contributed billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars for a country that was never in NATO. I think you could end that. Now, with
Well, let
Israel,
me ask you this.
okay.
If we end that,
Hmm.
what example does that set? Or does it? What precedent does that set? Russia's like, oh, Trump's back. He's talked Zelensky out of continuing to fight. Now we got this. What's going to keep them from like, oh, well, we got Ukraine. Let's see what we can do over here. Let's try this
Well,
over here.
the problem with the over here argument is that we have, since NATO was originally signed, we've advanced it eastwardly, nations eastwardly towards Russia like 8 times over the past, 20, 30 years. A lot of NATO countries already border Russia. There's not a lot of places for them to invade that aren't already NATO nations. So that would pull us all in. There's a reason they're going into Ukraine, right? During the Obama administration, Russia went into Crimea, which was part of Ukraine, and then Russia took it over. That happened during the Obama administration. They worked it out. Boom, now Russia has Crimea. Now Zelensky's saying, hey, we want Crimea back. We want it all back. I don't know where it's going to end, but I know that we have a very heavy involvement, and we are strengthening relationships with a new axis of evil. When you have countries like China stepping in, filling in the gaps, you have Russia, who is a nuclear country, doing a lot of business with countries like North Korea, Iran, doing, buying drones from them. If you were to just step back and take the politics aside and look for it and say, oh wait, this probably hasn't worked to our benefit. There have been good pivots here. It would be smarter for us to put an end to it now. You can tell Zelensky, because the minute America pulls out, this thing's over. Russia does take it over in a couple of months,
Mhm.
right? Like they thought would initially happen, right? They will take Ukraine over in a couple of months without American help. So that's where you have the pressure on Zelensky saying, look, you just got to give this up. Now, same thing in Israel with Netanyahu. You got to get him to the table. And you have to work out a deal, even if it's a two-state solution deal, which I know not everybody wants to hear, but I don't think that would scare Donald Trump and say, look,
They should
we've
have
got
a
to get
it
this
should
work
be a
out.
two-state solution. Like
Of course
that
it
shit's
should.
not
Of
easy. Like
course it should. It
the
blows my mind that people say that it shouldn't be. It's like, what are we doing here? I agree completely with
Palestinians
that.
have their own land. Like Israel's got to get the fuck out.
Yes, I mean now Israel's
I
land has
mean,
been
that's
advancing since 1948. I mean
my
they've been
God.
squeezed down and down and down. Yeah, no, I agree. So like two-state solutions that would bring the temperature down. It wouldn't is embolden China much to possibly go into Taiwan. And the only reason we really care so much about Taiwan is what I'm holding in my hand, what you're sitting in front of. Your phones, your laptops, your televisions, your computers at work, all of those chips are all made in Taiwan. And Vivek Ramaswamy had a great idea when he was running. He was like, look, Ukraine's not a NATO country. I hate it for them, but what are we doing? Taiwan, we do have to protect Taiwan. It is in American interest to protect Taiwan because of this. And he listed the reasons I just listed. But then he said, hey, why don't we bring some of these senior members over here and start manufacturing these here as well while we help defend Taiwan because we don't want our way of life stopped? Like, boy, that makes a lot of sense.
I can get down with that. No wonder you like this guy so much. All right,
Yeah, I
Chuck,
mean, only if you want plans, you go to Vivek.
do you remember? Oh man, this would have been almost 30 or 28 years ago, summer of '96. You may not. You weren't into this as much as I was.
Sure.
Bash at the Beach, July 1996, WCW.
Yes.
You had the Outsiders who had invaded WCW from the WWF supposedly. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. And they had a third mystery partner.
Yes.
And Hulk Hogan comes down and he's in his red and gold. And we're like, yes, he's going to save Sting and Lex Luger and Randy Savage. And then he drops the leg on Savage and he joins up with the NWO. You mentioned Axis of Evil
Mm-hmm.
about 10 minutes ago. I mean, like, is there any way that Trump gets so comfortable with Putin and Kim Jong-un, all of these people, where all of a sudden we're just existing almost on the side with them? Like where it's almost like, hey, we won't mess with y'all, y'all don't mess with us, but do whatever you want to do. We're not gonna really mess with you too much. Because that doesn't
Ukraine,
feel right to me.
Ukraine's a sovereign nation. And the people there seem to be good people. When the invasion first happened, and you heard about the grandmas throwing off the Molotov cocktails onto the soldiers, and all these stories, and a lot of them weren't true. The goes to Kiev and everything. You hear that, and you really get behind Ukraine. And it's awful to think about a sovereign nation being invaded by a larger nation that is militarily dominant, or what we thought at the start of the war was militarily dominant, but we don't have any agreements with Ukraine. Stories like this happen all the time. Go to the continent of Africa and look at what happens there. It's very interesting to me why we pick certain things to pay attention to and to do. Now, Ukraine they produce tons of wheat. It feeds most of Europe. I'm sure we get some wheat and stuff like that there from Ukraine. I know Russia produces lots of fertilizer and things like that. I know when the war first happened, that hurt the farmers a little bit. So we do have interest. I'm not saying we don't have interest in these nations, but to what end has always been my question. I honestly, as sad of a story as it would be, we don't have any agreements. Like, when do we decide what country to protect and what country not to protect? We went in, in the OG Bush, the Bush daddy in the '90s, when we went into Iraq the first time over Kuwait, right? It's because they were,
Yeah, for
supposedly
that oil.
stealing Kuwaiti oil and stuff like that. That was for an oil thing. I know we have examples of this before. I don't know what our example is for Ukraine. Huge wheat production, huge agriculture country. Is that it? Is there more? I don't know. Everything I've read has been we want to stop Russia from advancing, but we already have this in place with NATO. If Russia would have gone from Ukraine and then next right into Poland, well, boom, hey, Poland's in NATO, then you've got all of NATO on Russia. I really don't know
Why?
what the
Well,
answer is. So
wasn't the
to
whole
exist is fine with me.
but the whole reason we never let NATO never let Ukraine in is because they knew this shit might happen, right? And they didn't want to be responsible for it. So that I mean that's
Mm,
I mean that's that
ish.
it's
No,
almost like an insurance company not wanting to insure you because you're like close to a fault line.
To an extent, one of the reasons NATO wasn't let in is it was identified as one of the most corrupt countries on earth just about 7, 8, 9 years ago. I mean, in
Right.
recent history, I think Zelensky's tried to clean a lot of it up. Even during the war efforts, he's had to fire people in his cabinet, and they've probably done some shady things. I'm not saying Zelensky himself. I'm saying the Ukrainian officials. You don't clean corruption up overnight. Huge government corruption like that, but Nate, so that's one of the reasons NATO didn't get in. I mean, we have violated what was, an agreement, not a signed agreement, that, the original NATO nations would not advance towards Russia. There would be buffer zones. And we've done that 8 times, right? The NATO countries have done that, I believe, 7 or 8 times since then. I don't think that anybody was going to really let Ukraine in. I don't think that would have sped this up or slowed this down, either way. I think this was an opportunistic advancement with what was perceived to be very weak American leadership. And I think a lot of that is tied to the withdrawal we had in Afghanistan.
That was
I think there's
bad.
such
I don't
thing
know.
as emboldened people who are wanting to do this anyway, and I think that they are emboldened. Xi has been the premier of China for 25 years, 25 years. Same thing with Putin. I mean, these are long running regimes. We flip it every 4 years. Now, you could win again and be there for 8, but we flip this thing every 4 years. I do think on the world stage, some people are waiting to see who the leaders of America are.
Uh, where are you? Because this is it's so easy if you're in America to be like me and just simply focus on the things that affect America directly and forget about how much of the global landscape can end up impacting us as well. And because Trump is so abrasive and just like fucking crazy on to be honest and just says the wildest shit in the world, I think everybody gets hung up on that and what an awful person he is, that we forget everything else that's going on outside of this, right? Like this doesn't just exist within this continent or this country. Like all of these things are happening outside of it as well. So it's been a pretty interesting conversation because I'm not nearly as well versed in it as you are. So I'm taking what you're saying as okay, like that's yeah, I know a little bit,
Yeah.
and basically what I said was all I know. Where do you at this point right now, with the first debate coming up sometime next week? How are you seeing November play out from this fan? And this could change a lot in the next
Yeah.
few months, obviously. But where are you right now?
I think Trump wins. I don't think either candidate wins handily, but I think Trump wins. He'll lose the popular vote, right? But he will win because I've heard people commentate say, "Oh, he may win the actual popular." It really doesn't matter if you do or you don't. It's electoral college. The picture. I think Trump wins. I do know in a couple of swing states since Trump's conviction came out, Biden's taken a very small lead. I think Bob Ney puts this the very best way. Bob Ney, when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump in 2016, and the Billy Bush tape came out, the interview, right, the where they thought the mics were off, and Trump said, you go up to women and grab them by the
Yeah.
genitalia, and he talked about all of these things. When Bob Ney said he on all the talk shows that he did, Hillary went up 4 points right after that interview. And so they said, okay, Trump's done, right? Trump's done. And Bob said, oh, no, no. Trump's definitely going to win this thing. He said, Bob, what are you talking about? This tape's out from Billy Bush and, Inside Edition or whatever it was. Bob said, you go way more than 4 points if you're going to win. The fact that Biden got a, small lead in a couple of swing states after, Trump was the first former president convicted, I'm kind of leaning into that logic. I don't think that Biden's going to win.
What?
I don't think he's going to win any swing state. I think that it's a pretty dominant electoral college performance by
I
Trump.
think
I
so.
think he gets to the 280 no problem. Now that being said, what I'm most interested in seeing is the Trump cabinet layout. Last time he was president, he had John Bolton. John Bolton's as dangerous for this country as any other person we've ever had. He's never met a war that he does not want to be in. He has
Karl Rove was
very
bad. Dick Cheney was bad.
oh yeah, but I'm telling you, John Bolton. If those two had a baby, maybe as
Get your
bad as John
camera up.
Bolton.
Get your camera up a little
Oh,
bit. Get your
sorry,
camera.
I
There
said
you go.
maybe if they had a baby, it would be John Bolton. And I agree with you. They're bad too. John Bolton is a horrible person. I would love to see what Trump's cabinet looks like this time. That's actually going to be important for me. But because and I was going to write in Bob Ney if I was going to be honest with everybody, and which is an easy thing to do because I live in Tennessee too, just like you do. I was going to write in Bob Ney for president, and I'm not now because the world is in such bad shape. I think it has to be Donald Trump. But I'm curious to see what his cabinet looks like. When they start making these announcements and stuff after the conventions, we'll hear the
But
vice president pick.
I don't trust him to pick a decent cabinet. Like he picks
Well,
all
he
these
didn't the
people,
last time. He didn't the last
then
time.
either they see how fucking nuts he is and they leave, or he just gets temperamental and he kicks them out. Then he brings somebody else that he wants that has no
Yeah.
experience in that position. Like I mean, so I don't know. I don't trust his judgment to build a decent cabinet.
I think it's going to be important this time because of everything going on in the world, and hopefully, that's why I said I'm very curious to see how that would shape out, how the appointments would go, what would be released, before November 5th, all that. Those are big things that I'm watching. But to answer the question, yeah, I think Trump wins. Sounds like you think
By
he
the
would
way,
too.
no, I do. But also, I want to go back to the Clinton, the 2016. I think Hillary wins if James Comey does not release that or hint at releasing that report a week before the election. That's the one. That's what got Hillary. The week before the election, Comey comes out and he says, I forgot what, like the full thing didn't get released. And it turned out not to be nearly as damning as he made it sound.
Mm-hmm.
But just the fact that that came out a week before the election, I think that's what got her.
She was not a good candidate. And she, truth be told, she should have never been there. That should have been Bernie Sanders' race. That was a
Yep.
Bernie Sanders race. He won and
Yep.
everywhere
They
except
fucked
for at
Bernie.
the convention. Yeah, they fucked Bernie.
They fucked Bernie. And that's what they
So,
ought to do now. They ought to do that this year, right? They ought to
100%.
at the convention just be like, hey, listen, Joe, you can't do it. Sorry.
Yeah,
We're
it would
putting
make
somebody
sense for
else
the
in.
Democrats. Now, who they would put there, who knows? Bob Nate tells us all the time. I mean, if the Democrats were to make a change, and they're not, but if they were, and it were to be Michelle Obama, he goes, you might as well just, hand her the keys to the car that night. Nobody's beating her. Not Donald Trump,
Oh,
not DeSantis, not
no.
anybody. Doesn't have to like it. Nobody has to like it. And I'm with you. I'd be like, well, gosh, what are her qualifications other than being married to Barack? What would her? I mean, I hear you,
Oh, no. I'm
but
not. I
people,
would be all for her. I would vote for
yes,
her in a second.
I'm saying that even the people who wouldn't, like, you would have to agree, oh, this thing's over. She would literally beat probably anyone else in this country.
She's more
Probably
qualified than
handily.
Donald Trump was 4 years ago
Well, she was
or
married to a
8
president.
years ago. Yes. I mean, like she's a first lady. She was the wife of a U.S. senator. She's been politically involved even before that.
He
She
was a
wasn't a
U.S.
host of
senator for
fucking
like 2
Celebrity
years.
Apprentice.
You're acting like he was a U.S. senator like Joe Biden. He was a U.S. senator for like 2 years and then he ran.
And there's 2 more years than Donald Trump was anything before he was president.
That is a fair point. But
I
you're acting
mean,
like she's been around. You're acting like she's been around politics forever. But she has been around for a little bit longer. What's
yeah,
interesting
her
is
whole adult life. I mean, they did shit in Chicago before. I mean, like she
it's the community
understands.
organizer stuff. Calm down.
I'm just saying.
Interesting talk tonight. We'll have more on this week as this week plays out on Friday. Tom Scatera will be with us around probably 4 o'clock Central Time. So we'll have some more updates then as this week shakes out.
I'm going to hang with the Bidens in Delaware starting Thursday.
Wasn't Hunter's trial in Delaware?
It was. Here's what's
Don't
funny. Didn't even
file
notice.
any gun applications, Gabe.
So don't worry. So 2 Friday nights ago, we were in Wilmington, Delaware, for a minor league baseball game that Laura's daughter sang the national anthem at. The day of the trial was going on in Wilmington.
Oh,
I had no
wow.
idea. We were there. I just had no idea that's where the trial was happening. But sure enough,
That's crazy. Were people talking about it?
fuck no.
Yeah,
The reason I knew it was happening, I was at the gym the next day, and all the local news stations were on in Philadelphia, because Wilmington is literally like 20 minutes from Philly. Like
So it's right there.
It's right there.
Yeah.
They have to shut down Laura's town like pretty often. Well, whenever Biden goes back to Delaware from DC, like helicopters are flying over, airspace is frozen, stuff like that. Like it happens not that irregularly, I should say.
That seems like a giant pain in the ass. Like, that'd be cool to see one time, and then I'm like, all right, that's enough of this.
2 years ago, we were trying to get back to the airport to catch a flight in Nashville, and Vice President Harris was speaking at TSU's graduation. Interstates were shut down. We could not get to the airport. We had to go. I know. Yes, it was a pain in the ass.
Yeah, see, that's not cool. Figure it out. No. Figure it out somewhere else. We'll have more for it on Friday.
With Friday with Tom.
Friday.
He will provide a much more information than I was able to do tonight.
So. Oh, and Tom Scatera has forgotten so much more than I'll ever know. A lot of the knowledge I've gotten in the past couple of years is just by listening to him. But yes, the people who follow this religiously, and me following it, a lot more than I used to. I mean, this is a tumultuous time, to say the least. Like, I'm not trying to, say the sky's falling or whatever, but man, the chips are lining up. Everyone has been dealt their hand. It's looking like it could be scary. And so I think that's why it should be important for everybody as we vote in a few months.
Either vote or get ready for the rapture. Just kidding.
Left behind.
Rapture's not real.
Oh boy, here he goes. That wasn't me.
Bye.
All
All
right.
right, we're stopping.